Okay, good evening once again, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's proceedings. Today's proceeding is we'll be looking at the history and foundation of anti-Black hate in Canada, which will help us in understanding our past and build an equitable future. My name is Don Parchment, and I am one of two lawyers facilitating this program. I'm also licensed with the Law Society of Ontario. The BLAC Out Hate project is an initiative by Canadian Heritage. It's funded by the Government of Canada and hosted by Black Legal Action Centre. While this presentation is made possible through the support of these organizations, the views and opinion expressed within this presentation are solely those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the official policies, position, or endorsement of the Government of Canada or Canadian Heritage. Neither Canadian Heritage nor the Government of Canada assumes any responsibility for the content of this presentation. Further disclaimer, through this presentation, there will be discussions of history and legal concepts. Please note that this is not intended as legal advice and it does not create a lawyer-client relationship. We will acknowledge the people. We'll have a land acknowledgement. We're on ancestral traditional territories of the Ojibwe, the Anishinaabe, and in particular, the Mississauga of the Credit. This territory is part of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty. It is also covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. Today, Toronto, the traditional Mohawk name of this area called Toronto, and its surrounding areas are still home to Indigenous people. I am grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land. I also acknowledge many people of African descent who are not settlers, but whose ancestors were forcibly displaced as part of the transatlantic slave trade, brought against their will and made to work on these lands. Indigenous sovereignty is deeply and inextricably linked to Black liberation, and I will continue to mobilize and take action in solidarity with Indigenous people and communities. Lastly, before we start, we have some housekeeping matters. The audience will remain muted through the presentation. We'll leave room for question in the chat. If you have any technical issues or question, please private message our host, name Black Legal Action Center, and they will do their best to support you. Please remain respectful in the chat. Any rude or offensive language will result in removal from this presentation. Also, we'll be using Mentimeter for audience engagement and to evaluate the session. Throughout the presentation, please visit Menti on your computer or your smartphone. The instructions are on the screen. You can go to join. You can join Mentimeter at menti.com and you can use the code that is on your screen to join. We highly encourage your participation and we look forward to see you in Mentimeter. Throughout the presentation, we'll have a section where I say Menti time and you will go to Mentimeter to give your feedback and your participation. It's highly encouraged. The overview of the presentation, we intend to identify, respond, cope, and overcome and report anti-Black hate. That's what we aim to present through the presentation. The structure is we'll go through some definitions. We'll look at the history of anti-Black hate in Canada, how it has been systematically enshrined in Canada's systems, and how it presents itself today, which are contemporary issues. We'll also look at the racial trauma as a result of anti-Black hate, and we will look at resistance and resilience. So many of you might have heard the term before, anti-Black racism, but anti-Black hate, what exactly is anti-Black hate? The distinction between anti-Black racism and anti-Black hate lies in the severity and the nature of the conduct. So while anti-Black racism manifests as discrimination through sometimes expressed but more often subtle or unconscious biases, anti-Black hate refers to more extreme forms of expressions or motivation that meet a higher legal threshold or amounts to detestation or vilification. You want to note those two words, as we will come back to those two words, as they later in recent laws form the definition of hate. While anti-Black racism takes on a much more covert display, anti-Black hate, on the other hand, is expressed by more extreme forms of action that typically meets higher legal threshold. Anti-Black hate is motivated by bias against African, Black, and Caribbean persons based on their race, color, and intersecting identities such as religion, national origin, sexual orientation, gender, gender identities, language, disabilities, and so forth and so forth. You realize that anti-Black hate is sometimes manifested in expressions such as hate speech, hate crime, microaggressions, systemic racism, age discrimination, harassment, threatening behaviors, and segregation. Though anti-Black hate is just one subset of hate crime, we'll use hate crime as a marker to measure the proliferation of anti-Black hate in our community. So the image on your screen depicts the unique interplay between criminal offense and an expression of anti-Black hate. So if you look at the very first line, you will see that a criminal offense plus an expression of hate equals a hate crime. And if you have a criminal offense without hate, it's just a criminal offense. On the other hand, if you have hate without a criminal offense, you have what is called a hate incident. So you will see those terms coming forward as we try to divulge anti-Black hate. Why is anti-Black hate even important in our Canadian context? Let's look at some statistics. According to a publication from London, Ontario, in 2021, 1.5 million people in Canada reported being Black. The Black population accounts for 4.3% of Canada's total population and 16.1% of the racialized population. In 2016, Statistics Canada reported 11,515 of the population of London alone as Black out of a total of 383,000 people. This represents 3% of the population of London, and this is only one city of the 10 provinces of Canada. From the above sample, it is safe to say that millions of Canadian citizens and residents are faced with racially motivated hate on a day-to-day basis. But not only are they faced with hate, but are victims of racial hate who have to deal with the impacts such as isolation, inequalities, immigration challenges, self-esteem battles, mental health issues, poor access to healthcare and support, and the list goes on. Therefore, it is important to note that while anti-Black hate is not novel, it is catalyzed by anti-Black racism, which is a fundamental part of Canada's history and institution, which has a direct impact on millions of Canadians today. And we should note that it's not just a fringe or imported problem. Speaking of fringe or imported problem, we'll look at the timeline, the historic timeline of racism in Canada. And this will show that anti-Black hate or anti-Black racism was not imported and that it comes from our history here in Canada. Like I said, some people are of the opinion that Black hate is a social construct that is adapted from the United States, but this couldn't be any further from the truth. If you look at the graph, you'll see that from the 1600s to the 1800s, slavery existed in what we now call Canada, where Black people were legally treated as property, stripped of rights, and excluded from having full citizenship. This transition into present day, where the ideology that Black lives were less valuable justified unequal treatment long after slavery was abolished. It normalized systemic bias in law, institution, and social attitudes. See, the reality is that under the French and the British colonial rule, African people were enslaved, bought and sold and passed down as property, void of any rights as human being. Then, under New France, this practice was then formalized into law in 1689 under what was called the Code Noir. After the British took control in 1763, slavery continued. The United Empire loyalists who fled to Canada after the American Revolution brought hundreds of enslaved black people with them to places like Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Upper Canada, which we now call Ontario. So even as slavery was gradually abolished, culminating with the British Emancipation Act in 1834, Black people in Canada face widespread systemic racism. Some examples include segregation in schools, where Black children were often prevented from attending school with white children, and Black children were made to attend separate underfunded schools until well in the 20th century in provinces like Ontario and Nova Scotia. We saw where free Black people continue to face discrimination in employment, often being denied work, or even some were relegated to the most dangerous and lowest paying jobs. Many were denied access to trades and trade unions, or even having property. Many were denied property ownership. Black residents were subjected to unfair taxing and housing discrimination and vagrancy law. Now, it's ironic because the fact that some were subjected to vagrancy law, which is historically statutes that made it a crime for persons to be homeless or unemployed or to beg in the public. In some communities, white settlers actively tried to push Black communities out through intimidation and violence. Now, Canada is often remembered as the terminus for the Underground Railroad. This is a destination for African American fleeing slavery. So if you take a look at your screen, you will see a map showing the red lines, and those are the routes that the slaves normally take to escape slavery, and most of those routes ended in Canada, and so it is given the term the Underground Railroad. But while this may be true, and many communities like Africaville in Nova Scotia or Buxton in Ontario were founded formally by enslaved people, the conditions they faced were still shaped by anti-Black hatred. Many Black loyalists who were promised freedom and land by the British Crown were given very poor lands, or some were even denied totally, with some being forced into indentured servitude and lived in extreme poverty. In 1792, more than 1,000 Black loyalists left Nova Scotia for Sierra Leone in West Africa as a result of disillusion with racism and broken promises in Canada. To further concretize the impact of slavery and its contribution to anti-Black racism and anti-Black hate, there seems to be a cultural erosion from the mainstream narrative, where Black history was not taught or acknowledged widely until recent decades. The contribution of Black individuals to Canada's development, like farmers and soldiers, workers and activists, were minimized or even omitted entirely. So this foregoing shows the genesis of anti-Black hate in Canada through slavery, legal discrimination, and social exclusion between 1600 and 1800. This period laid the groundwork for systemic racism that continues to affect Black communities today. An essential part of change is acknowledging this history, knowing Canada's true past, and working towards a just and equitable future. Now, in later years, slavery and anti-Black hate, anti-Black racism were institutionalized in Canada. Even presently, systemic racism in Canada, particularly towards Black communities, has been fueled by discriminatory policies and practices across various sectors, to include the criminal justice system, immigration and education and employment system. These policies, often rooted in colonial legacies and white supremacist ideology, and this have created and perpetuated inequality, leading to anti-Black hate and violence today. In 1911, there was an attempted ban on Black immigrants through what was called the Ordering Council. And that Ordering Council was approved by the Canadian Cabinet in 1911, which is August 12, 1911. This Ordering Council proposed a one-year ban on Black immigrants. This act was driven by discriminatory attitudes and a desire to limit the settlement of African Americans, particularly in the prairie provinces. While this ban was never legally enforced, it was successful in perpetuating systemic racism, as what it caused was immigration officials to implement various measures to discourage Black immigrants. And they include measures like including harsh medical exams and discouraging agents from even assisting Black immigrants. On the contrary, white Europeans were welcome without barriers. And the impact was that a white-dominated population and workforce will foster and fuel a belief that Canada was a white nation, was the intention. So during the 19th and 20th century, you see there were a lot of policy-driven racial segregation and discrimination. While not always explicitly written in law, de facto segregation was enforced through local policies and institutional practices. For example, schools for Black students were segregated in Ontario and Nova Scotia until well in the 1960s. Some Black Canadians were denied service in hotels, theaters, public swimming pools, and employment and housing discrimination was widespread around that time. Africaville is one example of that. This community was a Black community in Halifax that was deliberately denied basic amenities and infrastructures like running water, paved roads, sewage, and garbage collection, and was ultimately forcibly demolished in the 1960s under the guise of urban renewal. Right now, I'll show you a short story on Africaville.
The vast majority of people have a picturesque image of Canada's values and history. Once a safe haven for African people to live freely. But would you believe me if I told you that Canada's past has a particular event among many that puts this image to rest? This is the story of Africville. African people have been in Halifax since its founding. People who were once enslaved and made into freedom. Despite their presence and help from the beginning, they were still met with racism within the city of Halifax. As a result, the African people settled along the city limits, forming the Black community known as Africville.
Some of us were Negroes. And so I said to my friends, where are the colored people of Halifax? And they said to me, they live in a place called Africville.
people of Africville built their community from the ground up, including services that the city would not give them. Notably, Seaview United Baptist Church was also created, the symbol and heart of Africville. The community paid city taxes but received nothing in return. Africville was left without running water, electricity, etc. Despite being neglected by the city, the village was labeled a slum. In 1962, the Halifax City Council passed a vote to demolish Africville and turn it into industrial land. What was African Nova Scotians had been destroyed. Voices of the Africville people were not considered, and they were forced to relocate.
There is always a curious tie in something between the fall and the creation. Taking this ghastly risk is the condition of their being.
Now, where are we today? This historical event is looked at as a prime example of systemic racism, but was left unaccounted for until the 24th of February 2010, when a public apology was given by the Halifax City Council, announcing $250,000 for the Africville Heritage Trust. Along with this, Halifax Mayor Peter Kelly made an apology as part of a $4.5 million compensation deal. The Seaview United Baptist Church was rebuilt, and Seaview Park was renamed to Africville Park. While it has been acknowledged and money has been put into churches and trust, descendants of Africville are not satisfied. Their homes were destroyed and they didn't receive anything from their tax payments. We must stand with them hand in hand as we fight to correct the past through acknowledgement, compensation, and communication between those who are directly affected and those who seek to mend the past. Don't sit in silence. Be part of the change and help fix the past for a better future.
Awesome. Thank you. So we see that's a story of one community called Africville that was totally demolished under systemic racism. The widespread impact can still be felt today, as this created impoverished and marginalized Black communities. It also solidified and institutionalized the idea that Black Canadians were second-class citizens. This segregation spilled over into the education system in 1965, where Black students were subjected to academic streaming and disproportionate disciplinary policies, leading to Black students being placed into non-academic streams and being suspended from school more frequently. This had severe effects on Black students, where Black students experience a far lower rate of graduation and reduced access to post-secondary education. As for the criminal justice system, Black people were over-policed and underprotected. In cities like Toronto, Halifax, and Ottawa, Black individuals were disproportionately subjected to carding and street checks, which amount to systemic racial profiling. This undoubtedly led to criminalization of Black presence in public places, disproportionate incarceration, and surveillance of Black youth and Black men. Discrimination in the employment system manifested in onboarding and other areas. Some studies have shown that applicants with African-sounding names were less likely to get called back, a likely result of lack of Black representation in leadership roles across the different sectors. This resulted in mass economic marginalization of Black workers, leading to intergenerational poverty in many Black communities. These acts of institutionalizing racism were even made worse by Black people being patronized, where cultural erosion and historic denial became the norm. Black history became largely excluded from school curricula across Canada, while Canada is celebrated as the savior for racism by virtue of the Underground Railroad, which we discussed earlier. The long-lasting effect of this is that erosion of Black people's contribution and struggle, and the perpetuation of the myth that racism is a US problem, which this undermines the calls for change in Canada. Now, that was a lot on the history. So let's look at how history affect today's narrative. What do we see today? In the present day reality, it is continue to be influenced by our past. Black Canadians continue to live in the shadow of systemic racism, manifesting in a number of aspects of our lives. There are incidences of blatant attacks fueled by hatred and white supremacists forming groups to purport hatred. In a recent CBC News article, very recent, we see where, as you can see on your screen, a 20-year-old woman was attacked. People drove up to her, used anti-Black comment, racist slurs, and assaulted her. So this is one way hate is manifested today. You might just be walking on the street and have racist slurs being hurled at you, or it could be a display of certain signs or symbols. So it becomes important to be able to recognize the different expressions of hate and how to report them. In another news article, the one to the right, taken from antihate.ca, we see where white nationalism in Canada is organized. They are now organized, emboldened, and is growing rampantly. So white nationalism in Canada is part of a loose right-wing extremist movement that promotes the interests of racially, ethnically, and sexually defined nationalism. They are often centered on white power. So these are another expression of hate via online mediums, and their agenda is to target marginalized groups and propagate anti-immigrant messages to achieve their goals. So hate today is manifested in a number of ways. It may be online, it may be hate speech, it could be cyber hate, online harassments, hate crime and incidents, or just a regular individual walking on the road and being attacked just for being Black, right? Speaking of hate, this pyramid shows the pyramid of hate. So if you look at the very top, we have genocide, and right below that in the orange, you have bias motivated hate, which is expressions of hate crime and anti-Black hate. So as mentioned before, anti-Black hate is in essence hate motivated by prejudice or bias towards a particular group or identifiable people. In a strict legal sense, there are 3 offenses in the Canadian Criminal Code that specifically pertains to hate, but the term hate crime is not used in those sections. So if you refer to section 318, section 319.1, and section 319.2, these are the sections concerning advocating genocide, which based on the pyramid you just saw, that is the utmost expression of hate, public incitement of hate or hatred, and willful promotion of hatred, respectively. So those 3 sections deals with the foregoing issues. Notwithstanding this, there are a number of other offenses that are taken to be hate crime that are more specifically referred to as hate motivated or bias motivated crimes. Those are existing policies that we just went through. However, there is a bill, which is a proposed Canadian law. It's called the Combating Hate Act, that it seeks to amend the criminal code to address hate motivated behavior by creating new offenses and strengthening the existing ones. It aims to criminalize certain public display of hate symbols and prohibit intimidation and obstruction of access to specific places like places of worship. And it also allows for harsher penalties when any crime is committed with hate-motivated intent. Importantly, the purported act also defines hatred, specifying that it means an emotion that involves detestation or vilification. And this is stronger than mere disdain or dislike. So now that we have an understanding of hate-motivated or bias-motivated crime, let's turn our attention to the rate of reported incidents in the last few years. According to Statistics Canada, in 2023, police services in Canada recorded a sharp rise in hate crime with 4,777 incidents reported. This is up 32% from the 2022 incidents, which were 3,612 incidents. These numbers mark the third sharp increase in 4 years. Overall, the number of police reported hate crime has more than doubled in the last 4 years, according to Statistics Canada. When we view this in the context of per populace, we see where there's a rise in hate crime of 29% year to year between 2022 and 2023. And when compared to overall crime rate, hate crime has seen an increase of over 130% between 2019 and 2023. So we can comfortably say that hate crime has become a problem in recent years. From the statistics, we can see that hate crime accounts for increase in the general crime rate between 2019 and 2023. And among this spike in hate crime, Nova Scotia, Ontario, British Columbia, these provinces account for the highest incidence. In light of this project, let's zone in on hate crime targeting race or ethnicity, as we're focused on anti-Black hate. From 2022 to 2023, much of the rise in hate crime targeting a race or ethnicity was a result of more reported crimes targeting Arab and West Asian population. However, what is important to note is that the number of hate crimes targeting Black population has increased 784 incidents, and this remains the highest proportion of hate crime targeting any given race or ethnicity. So we see one, where the increase in hate crime has become a problem, and we're seeing two, where the Black community has experienced the most increase in hate crime. Hate crime or anti-Black hate is the utmost expression of racism next to genocide. And that being said, as a country, how far are we then from the reality of genocide? Anti-Black hate has manifested into other areas of our current realities, including employment, policing, and even Black and Black hate. Now, Black and Black hate is a unique subsection of hate crime. This subset of hate crime is complex and nuanced as it intersects with race, identity, internalized oppression, and systemic injustice. Traditionally, hate crime were considered intergroup, meaning one identifiable group perpetuating bias-motivated violence against another distinct identifiable group on the basis of race, religion, origin, orientation, etc. However, hate crime can also be intragroup if the motivation is based on bias. For instance, example of intragroup hate crime is a Black person attacking another Black person for acting too African, or for being from another nationality or ethnicity. Example is xenophobic bias between Black Canadians and African immigrants. They're of the same race, however, there's still racial tension. So this is called intragroup racism. So hate between Black people is motivated mainly by internalized racism, colorism, and ethnic bias. Members of our Black community allow themselves to become brainwashed and their thoughts infiltrated with negative societal belief about their own racial group, which can manifest as hostility towards others in the same group. For another set, it is a matter of colorism, which is a developed preference for lighter skin tone and discrimination against darker skin individual. The remainder suffer from ethnic bias, which is tension between African Canadian, Afro-Caribbean, and African immigrants. The division between members of Black community has its roots in history and colonialism. Historically, colonialism and white supremacism promotes a narrative that devalues Blackness and perpetuates intergenerational trauma and reinforces negative stereotypes. Further, this has been systematically enshrined in Canada's society. For example, Canada is often referred to as a melting pot of culture, people, and background, many of whom are from the same race, which is the Black race. Canadian immigration policy is one group of law that promotes division among members of the same group, whereby the point system, for example, and historic exclusion shape class and ethnic divides. So when we speak about the historical exclusion, this was mentioned earlier. The picture you're seeing is the actual document that was signed, the Order in Council 1911, which was the document to ban Black immigrants from coming to Canada. So you see where this is a systematic thing that was enshrined in Canada's system. The education system is another medium in which systemic racism has now promoted division between members of the Black community, in that it fails to represent the full diversity of Black history in Canada, like African Nova Scotian history or Caribbean migration stories. It then becomes important that we tackle Black hate among our community and bring awareness to this issue in an attempt to disrupt internalized oppression that has been sold to us by colonialism and focus on encouraging solidarity among our different Black communities. This will also take away opportunity for political figures to use Black and Black hate as a weapon or a scapegoat to turn attention from other forms of crimes or from police brutality. More importantly, this informs anti-racism and anti-Black hate education and promotes community healing. So we look at the impact of racial trauma. So we've been through the history of racism, how it was institutionalized, where it came from, how it's institutionalized, and how it manifests today. But most importantly, it has an impact on us as individuals. And it is important that we address the impact of racial trauma on ourselves as the Black community. So when you look at the extensive history and present-day exposure to anti-Black racism and anti-Black hate, it has a significant impact on our overall health and our well-being. This is termed racial trauma. Racial trauma refers to the mental and emotional injury resulting from racism, racial discrimination, stereotype, hate crime, and other race-related stressors. This might be experienced whether directly or indirectly. Direct racial trauma is when the incident happens directly to you, whereas indirect racial trauma stems from when you witness it against someone else, particularly those you identify with. In order to better understand and heal from the holistic impact of anti-Black hate on our minds and our bodies, we need to look at racial trauma from a biopsychosocial perspective. The biopsychosocial model is a framework used in social work and other disciplines for understanding a person's well-being and challenges by integrating their biology, which is the body, their psychology, which is the mind and emotion, and their social environment. So those factors are looked at in order to assess the impact of racism on the person. When we look at it from a biological perspective, experiencing anti-Black hate has an impact on our biology in multiple ways. It all starts with the amygdala, and the amygdala is a part of the brain that is responsible for processing emotion such as fear, anxiety, recognizing danger. And this part of the brain attaches emotional significance to memories, and it helps to form new memories relating to your survival. You'll see that the amygdala is known as the fear center of the brain. It helps you to identify when you're in danger and helps your body respond appropriately to help you survive. Your brain then, in an effort to protect you, recognizes patterns of threat to help you respond quicker to potential threat, which then increase your chances of survival. It basically kicks your nervous system, and our bodies respond to anti-Black hate by triggering the amygdala because it recognizes it as a threat to our lives, our safety, and our well-being. You will see this happen, for example, we may experience racing heartbeat, sweaty palm, or we may feel our bodies becoming tense when, for example, you see a police cruiser behind us, or when we are driving or we interact with a police officer. And this could be due to things we have witnessed also, or direct experience of violence against Black people at the hands of police officer. The unique thing about our brain is that it doesn't know the difference between you actually being chased by a lion and you thinking you're being chased by a lion. In either situation, your nervous system will react. So whether you are actually experiencing anti-Black hate by the hands of the police, or whether you merely see a police officer cruising behind you, the fact that your brain, by virtue of the amygdala, now make that association, your nervous system will react to that stimuli. Psychologically, experiencing racial trauma impacts the way we think and process information about ourselves and others. For example, if our brain perceives a threat due to anti-Black hate, we may become hypervigilant and we may look for ways to mitigate potential threat, experience intrusive thoughts. We may experience lower self-confidence or self-esteem, especially when we enter predominantly white spaces. In terms of socially, racial trauma also impacts the way we interact with each other and society at large. For example, Black people feeling the need to code switch in predominantly white spaces. And code switching is, for example, a Black man slightly raising the pitch of his voice when speaking to a non-Black person so that he doesn't appear or come off to be aggressive or intimidating. All of this is social anxiety and social withdrawal. So it's important to keep in mind that everyone's response to racial trauma will be different. It is normal and expected to be impacted by racial trauma, and it doesn't necessarily mean that something is wrong with you. Your body, mind, and emotions are simply reacting to legitimate and real threats against your safety. However, it's important to note that prolonged responses to racial trauma without effective coping strategy and healing can lead to poor health outcomes. Additionally, the harsh reality is that experiencing anti-Black hate has a compounding effect. The more we experience anti-Black racism and incidents of anti-Black hate, we are not just responding to the incident at hand, but we are also experiencing our body's response to racism or anti-Black hate throughout our entire lives. Experiencing racial trauma places a large amount of stress on our bodies as well as deeply within our souls. It affects the way we think, the way we act, and the way we feel, and the way we behave in society. This kind of trauma is a type of trauma that gets passed down generationally. So intergenerational racial trauma refers to the cumulative stress, biological changes, and psychological effect that resulting from systemic racism and discrimination that are passed down across generations within a specific community. As discussed earlier, it is a byproduct of enslavement and colonization throughout human history. The good thing is that once we're able to identify and name what is going on, you are then able to develop healthy coping mechanism to help you heal and support others in their healing journey. So the most important thing about experiencing anti-Black hate is the story that you tell yourself. This is where the healing journey starts. What story do you tell yourself? Experiencing anti-Black hate is not just about the trauma of the incident itself, but also the story that you tell yourself about what just happened to you. So we're going to have a Menti moment. So we mentioned Mentimeter at the beginning. On the screen, you can see the link and the code, so I encourage you to participate. Question for you. After you experience an incident of anti-Black hate, how do you feel? Let me have your response in Mentimeter. Anxious. Exactly. That is one good response. Angry. Awesome. All right. So one person feels anxious, one person feels angry. Like I don't matter. Exactly. That is a very common response to anti-Black hate or anti-Black hate is unworthy. Thank you very much. I like the participation. I really appreciate that. So all of these initial emotions and reactions are normal. Overcoming anti-Black hate has two main components. One is a story that you tell yourself about what happened, and two is how you choose to cope with it. Thank you so much for your input in Mentimeter. Thank you. Coping with the psychological impacts. First, you have control over the story that you tell yourself after an incident of anti-Black hate takes place. You are not the problem. Always remember, your Blackness is not the problem. We also don't want to harbor hate in our hearts towards the person who committed an act of anti-Black hate against us. So a very unhelpful story to tell yourself is there is something wrong with me and I'll never be good enough because of the color of my skin. Refrain from telling yourself that story. That's very unhelpful story. Instead, a very helpful story to tell yourself is, my skin is beautiful and I have a rich culture regardless of what someone else thinks about me. This is the mentality that we need to have in the face of anti-Black hate. Okay, let's have another Mentimeter time. I'd like for you to give me one affirmation along the line. So some of my affirmations are, I am safe in my body, I belong here. Another one of my affirmation is, what they say or do does not define me, I define myself. Can I have one affirmation or two? Black is beautiful. Awesome. Thank you so much for that comment. Someone else views about me does not define me. 100%. I agree. Can I have another one? One more Menti moment, one more response. Thank you so much. I am enough. I am worthy. These are all good comments. Thank you so much. And I also have this one on mine. My worth is not up for debate. Perfect. So I'll move on. Thank you again for your participation in Mentimeter. Promoting our wellness and promoting our wellness in the midst of racial trauma. How do we do that? So given the long history of anti-Black racism and anti-Black hate that we have experienced and continue to experience, and the impact of racial trauma, it is important that we learn how to cope effectively and move towards wellness. In the moments following the incident, your nervous system will likely respond quite quickly, causing you to experience some of the following symptoms: shock, racing heartbeat, sweaty palms, hypervigilance. Some people may experience headache or chest pains, and in the long run, your people are likely to suffer from depression, low self-esteem, and poor self-image, or even anger. We saw that coming through on Mentimeter. And we have to learn how to promote our wellness and move against these type of feelings. So here are some things that you can do to calm your nervous system in the moment. The first one, try to close your eyes to limit the amount of information your mind is taking in. Take slow, deep breaths. Inhale through your nose and fill your diaphragm. Hold for 3 seconds and then release through your mouth. The psychological impact of this is that we are stimulated by our ears and our eyes, what we see, what we hear. So when we close our eyes, we limit the amount of stimulus that goes to our brain, and this will help to calm your nervous system in the moment when you experience act of anti-Black hate. Another exercise is called a grounding exercise, where you pause in the moment, you name 5 things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. So this exercise kind of takes your mind off what just happened and help you to calm down. If you notice you're going through the numbers 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you have to just focus on these things, what you can touch, what you can smell, stuff like this. This is called grounding, and once again, this helps to limit the stimulus that you've experienced. Also, it's important to repeat positive affirmations to yourself, like the exercise we just did. It's a very helpful one. So here are a few additional ways to promote your wellness while healing from racial trauma as time goes on. Talking about it is very important. One person said, "A problem shared is a problem half solved." Collective healing can come from sharing our experiences in a trusted community or with a trauma-informed, culturally appropriate, licensed mental health care professional. So this will help us feel heard and seen, which can help calm our nervous system. We need to focus on empowerment, focus on ways to take control or have a positive influence on your mental and emotional health. Remind yourself of how beautiful, how smart, and how capable you are. Refrain from thoughts and languages that are negative. In Canada, Black people and people of color are often referred to as the minority. We need to change our perspective because, in fact, people of color are the global majority in the world. So perspective is matter, and this is one example. Don't see yourself as minority, see yourself as a majority. Celebrate the beauty and the resilience of our people very often. So you also want to engage in healing, self-care practices, which help to counteract the impact of stress on the body and the mind. Listen to music, practice breathing exercises and mindful meditation, and practice gratitude frequently. You will find that healing from and coping with racial trauma is an ongoing and a lifelong journey. The impacts of racial trauma did not occur overnight, so healing from its impact won't happen overnight either. I hope you now have some tools to help you cope with and heal from the possible racial trauma. Our goal is to promote our wellness individually and in a community so that we can live healthier lives, thrive in society, and as we are created to do, and resist anti-Black hate. Okay, we're winding down. Let's look at resistance, resilience, and progress, how we move forward. Over the years, we have seen where Black Canadian civil rights leaders blaze trails in addressing the decades of oppression that we face as Black people in Canada. They have played a crucial role in confronting anti-Black hate, systemic racism, and social exclusion, both historically and even today. Their efforts span sectors like education, legal reform, community organizing, policy advocacy, and cultural empowerment. However, there is still much work to be done, and we as proud Black people of Canada must carry the torch. We must continue to exude resilience, resist oppression, and the negative notion that has been painted about us as a people over the years, and continue to reach for progress in eradicating anti-Black hate. We must continue to educate ourselves like we're doing now, so we're able to educate others on our history and the grand contribution we make to this country. We must continue to lobby for legal reforms, and we must come together in solidarity as a community and empower our culture. Like Viola Desmond, let's challenge racial segregation, both intergroup and intragroup. Like Dr. Charles Roach, let us advocate for Black liberation. Fighting anti-Black hate as a people is a collective, multifaceted journey requiring self-awareness, community building, systemic advocacy, and pride in our culture. We should not feel responsible for the hate we have to cope with as a community. However, we hold the power in shaping the narrative, building resilience, and driving change for ourselves and future generations. I'll hasten to remind us that anti-Black hate is not only external, it can and has been internalized and reproduced. This is how intragroup anti-Black hate came about. Therefore, while we fight the external sources of anti-Black hate, we must heal from internalized anti-Blackness, confront colorism and texturism and the standard of beauty set by colonialism for our community. Let us continue to celebrate all forms of Blackness, encourage unity intra-group, and shun language and jokes that degrade any form of Blackness. Remember, anti-Black hate is an extreme expression of anti-Black racism. Therefore, to stem anti-Black hate, we must first challenge anti-Black racism. While I wrap up, some of the key takeaway that I'd like to leave with you is remember that anti-Black hate is distinct and it is very dangerous. It goes beyond covert racism and involves explicit acts like threats, violence, and hate, propaganda, and things like that. Also, remember that it is often legally defined as hate crime. You will see hate crime coming around, and it's rooted in bias against race, ethnicity, religion, and gender. Anti-Black hate also exists within the Black community, which is intragroup Black hate, and these divisions are legacy of colonialism and can be exploited to undermine collective progress. So we need to shun away from internal anti-Black hate. We also need to remember to promote our wellness in the midst of racial trauma. Talk about it with qualified professionals and groups, and engage in healing and self-care practices. Refrain from negative thoughts and focus on empowerment. Solidarity and education are essential for change. Healing from anti-Black hate requires self-awareness, community unity, and systemic advocacy. So confronting both external and internal sources of anti-Blackness is key to creating a more just society. And don't forget, resilience, resistance is the way forward. Black Canadians have long been at the forefront of civil rights justice and community empowerment, like we mentioned, Viola Desmond and Dr. Charles Roach, and we must do our part today. I leave you with this one. Knowledge of history and the metamorphosis of racism in Canada is crucial in addressing how it is manifested today, which is anti-Black hate. Here's a quote from Ghana. It is called the Akan proverb, and it goes, "Say wo wo fina wo san kofa a Yankee yiri." And this translates to mean it is not wrong to go back for that which you have forgotten. This proverb is central to the Sankofa concept, which encourages learning from the past to build a better future. I want to thank you for your attention and for your participation. Thank you for spending your time with us this evening, and we really appreciate it. We'll open for any questions that you may have. Adrian, you there? Natasha?
Yes, we're here. I also would like to thank you all again for joining us for this presentation. This is all part of the BLAC Out Hate initiative that Don has mentioned before. And our focus is being able to create opportunities and conversations to address and tackle anti-Black hate. One part of the project that we're exploring currently is creating intentional webinars and educational spaces to address the public. So if you have any community spaces that you think would benefit from these sessions, please do feel free to email us at blackouthate@gmail.com. And in addition, you could check out the Black Legal Action Instagram for any other updates as well. We do have a few other sessions that are going to be coming up in the future. On November the 20th, from 6 to 7:30, we'll also be holding a session called Know Your Rights that dives in a bit more into some of the specific legislation that's around for folks to know about and protecting themselves in the case of anti-Black hate. So I encourage you to check out the social media as well. All right, so I think we'll wrap up there. So Don, thank you so much for your time today with us. We appreciate your insights, the time that you've taken to really inform us and walk us through the foundations of how we are here today. So we really appreciate the efforts that you've taken in developing this session. So thank you very much.
You're most welcome. My pleasure. Thank you, Sawyers.
All right. Well, take care, everyone. Have a lovely evening. And we hope to see you in the next BLAC Out Hate initiative webinar. Thank you so much for coming out, everybody.